Yeah, I think that's good.
All right. Hello, mega people. Welcome to North of America. My name is Kevin Bowers, and here we are to think about the world and debunk any orthodoxies and confusions. To my right is Casper, and I'm a lucky man. I get to be a teacher. I teach young people, and Kyle, you're 17? Yeah?
Yep.
And very insightful young man with sort of complex ideas and concerns about the world. We fell into a conversation the other day about when Jeremy Corbyn lost the election in the UK, and I was impressed by his knowledge of who Jeremy Corbyn was, and then it went much deeper than that, and it went into I think we shared sort of a kind of a melancholy, sort of despair over what that meant for, well, the world, for change, for truth, for justice, for sanity, for the planet. Anyway, so yeah, when that happened, I haven't talked to North of America since that happened. But I had to. I was right upset. I was like all bummed out. Was that Wednesday night? Wednesday night.
I think so.
And
last Wednesday.
And anyway, so that got us to talking when I came into work, and Casper and I share a second period that where we're on prep, I guess.
Yeah.
And sometimes we fall into conversation. And I thought as we're sort of trying to figure out where we're at in the world, and as we're trying to sort of figure out how to live in these fairly desperate times, youth is something that comes to my consciousness a lot. I get frustrated, and I was very frustrated by and we talked about this. I don't know the stats on this. I don't know how many young people came out or didn't come out in the UK election. But I do believe that it is going to be young people that are, if they would vote, if they would follow their hearts and sort of disentangle themselves from something, and maybe that's what we can talk about, and put forward their political wills more forcefully in a democracy, that the world would change. So I think youth is going to be perhaps the answer to our malaise, and I thought it wise to hear from the young.
The young peoples.
Yeah. So it's an unfair question, Casper, to be the spokesperson for a generation.
That's fair.
But I do think you would have your finger on the pulse in a way that would be impossible for a balding man like myself to have. So, what would you say people, young folks like yourself, just sort of like you're just at the end of high school and you're sort of looking out into the world beyond, and you're designing your life, and you have this spectre of the environment and global warming and Trump and bad stuff. What sort of spins around in your heart and your mind?
Well, I think for a lot of people, like the concept of time and like planning for the future is like something that's just like completely been warped, like 100%. Since like your guys is like when you guys were going to school, my parents, like their experiences are completely different from ours, I think, and I think that's because like when we see the future, when we see the stats that people are putting out about like when we can stop, or when our time is up for like bringing an end to the crisis of global warming or trying to improve our emissions and stuff like that, which is usually it's like around the 10-year mark. When people see that, they're like, well, university, if we're at the end of high school, university is 4 years, so that's 6 years left, and then what does it really matter? Why am I preparing and spending so much effort for 6 years? Even though like realistically, if you look at it, like it says like 10 years would be when we need to like hit our goals.
Right.
But after that, like, life still continues, even if it's worse, like, it still continues.
Right.
But I think for a lot of people, like, it's
like,
hard
this
to
is
get
the tipping
past.
point of like when
Yeah.
when we have lost the reins. That's my sort
Yeah.
of reading of the IPCC
Yeah, I think-
report. It's like after 10 years, we're into irreversible, catastrophic,
And social,
scary-
like, downfall.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of people see, and it's like,
Yeah.
and it's, in a way, like, it's reasonable to say that. Like, it's just the truth. Like, if you say, well, in 10 years, this is all going down the drain, why should I care? Like, it's hard to fight against that idea because it is kind of true, in a way.
It is kind
So I think that that's, like, part of the reason why you see, like, a lot of cynicism, especially from Gen Xers. Like, it's a huge part of the culture is just being cynical, because I think that's the reality that they're faced with.
Being cynical. So is that a defining characteristic of your sort of your age group, cynicism?
Yeah, I think so.
How does that express itself?
I describe it to some people as like, we're the hippies if they were depressed and like sad about everything. Like, that's honestly what our generation is. And I think it is a lot of humor, like cynical humor, because like, I mean, a lot of us are still kids, so it's hard to deal with something like this huge without being humorous about it. And I think that's how it expresses itself. And you don't really see like a lot of like just pure cynicism where it's just like the world sucks, we're all gonna die. It's more like masked with humor.
Right.
But it's like under the current, and it's just kind of running throughout, I think, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to, like, if you didn't mask it with a bit of humor, then you wouldn't have a whole lot of friends.
No,
You're
yeah,
right.
exactly, right. That's the hard
Yeah.
part, is that like a lot
Yeah.
of people like, and people don't even like to talk about it, which is why I think it expresses itself in that way, because it's a terrible thing to talk about. Like, people hate it, but people also can't think about anything else for a large part of their lives.
Would you say that because it's an interesting thing, right? Where you got all these people sort of like being cynical and jokey, and not want to talk about it because it's awkward socially,
Yeah.
I presume. But on the other hand, you're saying people are thinking about it all the time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's almost like a thing of like, even if people don't know they're thinking about it, they are. So like, even if they think that they're upset because of something else, I think that it's like it's an underlying thing, like
Yeah,
almost
man.
an underlying trauma of like things that are like rooting up from the fact that like we've been told for pretty much our entire lives that we're gonna die young, and a lot of people think that. So it's like, gosh, if you're being told that your entire life, of course you're gonna think that life sucks.
Right. I will say, as an educator and being around young people, and frankly, it's not just young people, but anxiety comes up a lot,
Yeah, I think
right?
so.
Like just, I mean, it's something as sort of mundane as attendance, in my
Yeah.
classes, right? It's like, I'll often like, so-and-so has been absent this week due to, anxiety. And I don't remember as a young person that being a thing. Now, it might just be,
Yeah.
I didn't ask, no one was showing, no one was telling,
Yeah.
But it does seem like there's a spike in anxiety, and I think a lot of people, in the world would recognize that. And I have wondered, is it this, exactly what you're saying, this sort of like subcurrent of
Yeah.
dread, right? It's like, how can you have not only your own mortality, but the mortality of your sort of your decisions and your future and your
And
your
everything that you
plans
do.
and everything that you do.
Every action is just, and it's like, of course, for everyone, that's something that happens even before like the climate crisis. Like, people always had the like knowledge that at some point everything would end and we would all die and blah 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 blah. But it's just like
You're just
when
talking
you're
about normal mortality.
yeah. But
okay.
when you're confronted with it face on, it's like it's a different type of beast, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you can't spend time to come to terms with, and it is sort of like this panic because it's like, usually I don't think we're not designed to think about death and to think about like our entire culture ending so suddenly and so quickly, like that's something that takes years to process, and even people who are old and die of old age, like it's still hard for them. So like it's very hard for young people to, I think, come to terms with that. And I think it does result in a lot of anxiety, but I think it's like this anxiety, depression, like feedback loop.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm anxious about the world ending. Because I'm anxious about the world ending and everything going to crap and society falling apart, then I'm depressed because I don't want to do anything because it's going to happen anyways.
Right.
So and then because if you're not doing anything, then you're like, time's running out. I'm not doing anything. This isn't good.
Right,
So it's like
yes.
this like cycle of just it going over and over and over again.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel that, and that's one reason that, you know, North of America exists, is because I just find it hard to live in the world and do my day-to-day thing, which, by the way, I'm a very lucky man and I have lots of joy in my life, right? Like I've sort of, through, you know, great fortune, I, you know, have a wonderful wife and family and a cool job, and I get a, you know, like, yeah, I'm in the 0.01% of luck on the planet of all time, you know, and I'm sort of grateful, right, for, but it's not enough. Because I can't just like sit back and sort of like go, yeah, life's pretty good. Because there's always this sneaky thing, this little like serpentile, like, you know, reality just kind of pokes its head up in your guts and says, yeah, well, you got 10 years.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
the IPCC gave us 10 years, and yours...
It's the worst deadline on the planet.
It really is. It's now when I was your age, and this is still true today, but the nuclear thing was, and I remember, so that was like Ronald Reagan was the president there, and he was a piece of work. I remember seeing a cartoon. I was probably younger than you, and it was a picture of Gorbachev, I think it was, who was a Russian guy, and Reagan, and they were sitting in a room up to their chests in gasoline. It was written gasoline, and they both had matches, and they were like staring at each other, like they're, you know, who's going to strike the match first and blow up the whole damn planet. That dread was significant, and real. And we were in the middle of the Cold War, where they're just like calling each other dicks, like with the fingers on the buttons.
And I think
but it wasn't inevitable. I mean, there's a big difference with this one. Like this one has this sort of like rolling narrative. It's like, it's coming.
Yeah.
Like there's no, like we'd always sort of go, no one would be stupid enough to hit the frickin' button.
Yeah.
And you sort of, you could sit back in that, the easy chair of that answer a little bit and sort of go, no one wants to push the button, because that's a suicide button, right?
Exactly,
it's like you're both dead. So it's like, there's so much, well, this is mutual assurance destruction, you know, it's sort of like the Dr. Strangelove kind of thing, right? Like the absurdity of pushing it is real enough that perhaps it won't be pushed. Global warming, on the other hand, is...
And there's a lot more like players in the field with global warming, because it's not just like two world leaders that you're dealing with, it's like all the countries in the world you're dealing with, and not even those leaders, everyone underneath them, oil execs, like companies. There's so many different people that you have to kind of like corral into doing the same thing, and it's really hard when you live in a selfish world to do that.
Yeah. Now, one thing up here in North America that we take very seriously is optimism.
Yes.
Because and a lot of the stuff I've written and pushed out on this channel is about debunking both the orthodoxies of our age, which you're sort of talking about, of the oil execs and the media narratives, which are detrimental and disprovable. And one of those narratives is cynicism. Like, we can't, you know, people are too cynical, people are too lazy, there's too many vested interests. Washington is owned by oligarchs, you know, and by the way, you know, these are pretty damn good arguments. But I would counter that that their hold on the narrative is breakable. I would suggest to you that with a little sort of flick of a switch, cognitive sort of communal switch, the world could change abruptly and for the better and for reason, and science, right? And that the technical solutions, say, solar, wind, all those kind of technical pieces to get us to decarbonize are already available. They're sitting there on the shelf waiting to be deployed. We have politicians and young people who have political solutions, Green New Deals. Jeremy Corbyn had the Green Industrial Revolution. We have the Green New Deal and the LEAP Manifesto. So we have political solutions. We have technical solutions, both ready to be deployed in the time frame that the IPCC gives us.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's all there. Now, one of those pieces is young people, and there's something between.
And I think that, like, part of the thing with that is, like, we know that it's a possibility that could happen, but I also think that, like, one way is I think people look straight to, well, it's not going to happen. People are selfish. There's no way that they're going to give up all their power. But I think another way that people look at it is, well, that could happen, but it's just not going to happen without a huge fight, and there's going to be still deaths caused by that. And like I think a lot of people are thinking, like, well, at some point, if nothing happens, it's going to be a revolution. Like, it's going to be like complete upturning of the social structure, and even that is terrifying. Like, even if we don't like it, it's still terrifying because it's something so new and something that we have never encountered before, in a long time at least.
Right.
It's something that's necessary, and I think we all know that. And we know that things are going to change drastically, and I think that that's part of it, is the change drastically part, because our society isn't going to stay the same for like the next 10 years. There's going to be a huge like switch, and it's going to be fast, and it's going to be quick, and it's going to be relatively unexpected for a lot of people.
I think that's true. Now, you were making an assumption there that revolution was a violent act, and there's precedent for what you say, for sure. It strikes me that it doesn't have to be.
No.
I mean, it could be electoral.
That's true. But I think that a lot of people, like, with how the British election went, it's getting frustrating, I think, for a lot of people. Like people are at the end of their ropes with this stuff. The people who actually care, at least, they're just like, from what I see from people around me, like, people who care about this stuff are, like, very close to being done with the way that things are run.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think our elections are gonna be run the same way for much longer.
Do you have a sense of what that looks like? Like, what's the result of that frustration? And because there's one way it goes is apathy. Like, screw it, man. Doesn't matter anyways. I'm not going to bother voting. Mm-hmm. Which, from my sort of gruff old man perspective, sort of pisses me off. It's like, get out and vote, because honestly, the young people don't vote near enough.
No, I don't think so.
I heard a stat, and I assume it's true just because I want it to be true. but I read or saw somewhere that if the 18 to 35
yes,
demographic,
I think I saw that.
Right, votes at the same rate as the over 65 demographic, who obviously is over 65, incredibly conservative. That's why we get our Trumps and Fords and Trudeaus. If young people voted not more than just the same amount as those people, that electoral politics changes utterly. Like that big change that you're talking about would just happen on that basis alone.
And it's so.
And then, I don't even know what the numbers are, but let's say it's 60% of young people vote. It's like the world changes.
Yeah, no, I don't.
You save the planet. You save your own children. You save whales. You save, like all the stuff we, that we love and care about. It's like you can have it all, and you can have free education.
Yeah. And
you could have early childhood education, and you could have better drinking water and cleaner air and better food, and my God, it's just like, and
it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, and part of the reason it doesn't make any sense to me is I feel like it's so pushed in, like, in youth culture to vote. Like, like, social media influencers, and I hate that word, but people who are, like, in that status, they're always telling young people to vote. Like,
Who would that be? Just for someone like me, like, who's an influencer? That's a word that most of us don't really know. Right?
I couldn't give you an example off the top of my head.
J-Lo?
I don't even know. Wasn't that she a singer from like the 90s?
Maybe, yeah, see, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, so, yeah, I couldn't give you an exact example, but I remember in the British election, I remember seeing it a lot. I couldn't give you specifics, but I remember even on Twitter, like if you looked on Twitter, it was like people who were advocating for Labour were just like, it was just like wall after wall of text, like vote for Labour, go vote, go vote. So I don't understand it.
Why it didn't work?
Why it didn't work, because I feel like a lot of young people, from what I saw, like, it seemed like they did vote. So I'm like, who are the people who are young people who are not voting, why? Like, that's the bigger question. And
totally.
Why aren't they voting? Why is that specific subset do they just not care? Or is it just that they feel like they've given up? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And I would like to see the stats on that. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that Jeremy Corbyn's defeat hurt so much. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is complicated.
Yeah.
No, it's not that Jeremy Corbyn's complicated. I think actually he's pretty straightforward. His position was complicated because of Brexit. Like Brexit, problem with I think there's in retrospect there's almost like no way he could win, because you had Brexit, which is over 50% of the UK wants it.
Yeah.
They've already showed that, and then they showed it again. But the Labour Party was about 50-50. Mm-hmm. Half of Labour followers wanted it, the other half didn't, vehemently. And the part that didn't want it, the Remainers, are all in like London and big cities, and they're all these like liberal class people, educated, middle class. They don't want it at all. Mm-hmm. And that's the milieu in which Jeremy Corbyn's living in London. But half of his support is from Brexiters.
Yep.
So no matter which side he chose, he was losing half of his flock. Mm-hmm. And of course, Boris being a cynical dick and smart.
He latched onto that.
Yeah, just like his logo was "Get Brexit Done."
Yeah.
Which is, that's punchy, man. I gotta say, that's pretty clear. And if he has 83% of his conservative people want it, he's getting all that pie, plus maybe 25% of Labour's pie, because half of those guys can't vote for so they want Brexit. And frankly, they earned it. They had a referendum, they got it. So anyways.
I saw a map of like England, and it was like, I forget what the percentages was, but it was like if didn't vote was a candidate, they would have won by like a huge majority.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So the turnout was tiny. Is that what that means?
Apparently, it was like it was like 18% Labour and like 12% Labour or something like that. So it was like a huge, but I don't know. It seems like they said the turnout was bigger than they've ever had before. So
yeah, I haven't dug into the numbers sufficiently, but where I was going with that, if I can retrace my head.
Yeah.
When that happened, and we started with this, we were both pretty depressed on Thursday when we came back in after the Wednesday election. And then there's this sort of like existential despair. It's like, oh my God. Oh shit, what's going on there?
I don't know. It's recording.
Is it? Okay. Well, that just makes for good video right there. Meta.
Yeah.
It's a meta moment. There's this sort of like existential despair when that sort of progressive push fell on its face in the UK. And so I'm like totally depressed about this, because I have always believed, and I'm trying to hold on to this optimism, that a serious progressive candidate will win. Mm-hmm. Now, one might say that I've just been proven wrong, and that's why so much angst, I think, was invested in this. But for the reasons that I just recounted, with Brexit being in the mix, it was almost an impossibility. So in that sense, it's an unfair experiment for the progressive cause.
Yeah.
Are you with me?
Yeah, and I think the media,
and that's really important. And now you're partially hearing a guy trying to piece together a logic that allows me to sustain my hope, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But on the other hand, I think it's true. I think
No, I don't think that election was just in.
it's
Yeah.
too confounded
There was a lot going on.
And of course, the media smears of
Yeah.
Corbyn, which were just like unbelievable, and that of course made me
And I
incredibly
think
upset,
if we're looking
which aren't
towards,
going anywhere.
if we're looking towards 2020, with the
Right.
candidates who are up, I think like the three top candidates are probably like Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Warren.
Yep.
Who, Joe Biden is.
Did you see the one with the? Did you see this meme where he's talking about the hair on his legs? And I'll put it below.
Okay.
It's the most. He's talking to a crowd of people, and he goes off in this weird tangent where kids are playing with the hair on his legs because when they dry in the sun, his hair on his legs become golden. And kids like to touch the hair on his legs. And then he says some weird stuff like, I'm used to having kids on my lap. They're like cockroaches. It's the most goddamn, you'll see it. It's the strangest, it is surreal. And I'm like watching it going, are they playing with technology?
No,
Are
yeah.
they feeding his mouth digitally and making, but it's like, I think it's real.
He seems senile.
Well, this is it. That's right.
He's losing his mind.
Yeah.
And I think that he's like,
So,
he's
yeah,
trying
I
to be
didn't
this
wanna get off tap
he's
here,
trying
though.
to be like this classic liberal progressive type. But I don't think that he's not a strong enough candidate. I don't
That's
think
right.
they need like new ideas because
Yeah.
people don't want to vote for the same thing. And I think that like
No, this is it. And no one will come out for Biden.
no, I don't think so.
I think Trump will, pretty damn sure Trump would beat Biden. Just
Yeah.
just blow him out of the water.
Yeah. But I think Bernie and Warren, they're risky candidates for sure, just because of like the nature of what they're saying and who they are. But I think that I think that if they were supported by the media and if they were supported by
That will never happen.
the government or people in the Democratic Party, then I think they would have a great shot. I think they would be able to do it. But it's hard because, again, like, you have so many vested interests everywhere else where it's like, and they're kind of, both of those two are like campaigning pretty much against those people, so it's hard to get the support of people who you're fighting.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, I think one thing you can't count on is the media to support Bernie.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And,
No.
on the other hand, young people and lots of people don't trust the media anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Trump's support, in large part, is vilifying the media. Like,
Yeah.
he'll literally point to them and say, you are bad people, you're liars.
That's why I think
and
that
it works.
Yeah.
It works. So,
Although I think that that's why maybe perhaps Bernie would have a better chance in America, at least if, I mean, Trump's probably going to get impeached pretty soon, so we don't actually know how that would play out with a new candidate if that happened, but.
no, he's not going to get kicked out. He'll survive the Senate for
Yeah.
sure. He's not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's what, I've heard a lot of people say that, so if he's still there by the next election,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the media does hate him so much, and I don't see that changing, so perhaps they wouldn't really have any choice but to support Bernie.
I think you're gonna see, if it's Bernie Trump, the media is gonna be so confounded.
I know, they don't know which position to take.
Yeah.
Maybe they would actually have to report.
Their heads are gonna blow up. It's to me that would be a fascinating show.
Yeah, that would be crazy.
And I kind of look forward to it. And if
Yeah.
you look at the polls though, Trump versus Biden, Trump versus Bernie, Bernie kicks his ass.
Oh, yeah.
Like
And he
the-
has since 2016.
That's right,
like,
and
in
he
those
didn't.
polls.
That's right, and Hillary didn't. Like
Yeah, no.
back in those days, it was pretty close between Trump and Hillary. Everybody said that Hillary was a shoe, and it's like you look at the polls, it's like there's no shoe here.
No, yeah.
But if you had gone with Bernie, he had like 10-point leads, where Hillary might have had 2-point lead. And
people are saying-
that continues to be true, that
Yeah.
Bernie outplays. But like,
With the Jeremy Corbyn
Mm-hmm.
lose, so that sort of like, I think a lot of people are saying like, well, that's what happens when you try and get a candidate that's too progressive. Then you'll lose all your votes. And I think that's what some people like in middle class America are thinking when they see Bernie.
Because I had looked at it. Oh, a little technical thing there, good people. But Casper, who's a master filmmaker, has just sorted our technical out. And
Just push record.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, you were going on about how the media is framing this sort of like idea that if you go too far left, I guess I should use my left hand. If you go too far left, you can't win.
Yeah.
And you were suggesting that was a form of smear, a form of like planting that in people's heads.
I think so.
So yeah, keep going with that.
Yeah,
we'll
and I think
figure
that
out how to
like
edit it.
by saying that they give an impression, because like when the media talks, usually they kind of try and talk from the point of view of the people. So when they say, well, if you go too far left, obviously this is what happens, because you see what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, then, well, if people watch that, then you're saying, well, yeah, obviously, because if they're saying it, then I guess everyone else thinks that, and if everyone else thinks that, then no one's going to vote for Bernie. So I might as well try and get Biden in. And I think that's sort of like this playing with the strings type thing.
Young people aren't going to vote for Biden anyways, so that argument falls apart pretty quick. Right?
Yeah, but it's for the older middle class
that's
people.
Right. And
I think that in a way, I think kind of rely on like, well, what are young people going to do? Because if they see what young people are going to do, then I think a lot of them are like, well, if young people are advocating for Bernie, and since they don't know anything, then he's the wrong candidate.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting. So that the youth's like agenda is not an influencer on middle class, middle-aged white people.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think there's some truth to that. And I'll tell you what, the media will ignore the youth agenda roundly. Because it's a dangerous agenda for the establishment, right?
Yeah.
Because what are you going to be asking for? You're going to be asking for the end of carbon, and you're going to be asking for free education and healthcare and all these things that suck money away from oligarchical reserves. So
all of their advertisements. It's just great when you see Bernie Sanders in a debate. He said this one time he was on I think a CNN debate, and he said to the camera, he was talking about healthcare, and he said, tonight there will be an ad for healthcare insurance, and he basically said they're taking your money, and he talked about all the different things, what they were doing wrong, and he just blatantly said, tonight on CNN there will be an ad for health insurance.
Yeah.
And it was just like,
and it was
calling them out.
I think the next ad after that, I didn't see it, but it came up as a thing, and I think the next ad was health insurance.
Yeah.
Well, so that's one thing that Bernie is doing that and I know Corbyn didn't, and it didn't work. But Bernie's pushing it, and he doesn't have the Brexit problem. So, and that is, not only is he offering young people free education, he's offering debt relief.
Yeah.
So even if your parents, like I got kids and paid for their education, so it's like I would get money back retroactively for my kids who went to school.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you don't vote for that, as a young person, let's say it's going to be 30 minutes out of your life. That you're going to be making about $55,000, because that's probably about the average student loan debt if you go to university and you get a degree. I'm making these numbers up, but they feel about right. Let's say 30,000.
70,000 maybe?
Okay, but it could go up.
I don't know.
But anyway, the average student debt is immense. Like it's a lifelong endeavor to pay it off. But anyways, Bernie Sanders just said, you take 40 minutes out of your life and you register to vote and you go and vote on voting day and you get a progressive candidate. You just made yourself $50,000.
Yeah.
Let alone save the planet. Made a world in which having children is feasible.
And I think part of the reason why people aren't doing this is I think that like the billionaire class in America has gaslit and manipulated the American people into thinking that by supporting them and by ensuring that they have the institutions in which they can succeed and exist, that one day, you know, the American dream, well, one day you could be there. And
Right.
what would you do in my position? Of course you'd want to keep your money.
Right.
So it's sort of this like
That's right.
manipulative tactic of like this weird empathy for people.
For billionaires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even, it's just wild.
It is wild. But I think you're absolutely right. The American dream is predicated on you one day becoming rich.
Yeah.
And
And people don't want to let go of that. Like it's a nostalgia almost.
Interesting.
For a day where that could have happened to anyone.
yeah. No, I think that's astute. Although, you know, I think a lot of young people are,
I don't think.
hey, like, it's not a
Yeah.
rational thing. And
No, yeah.
gaslighting's not a rational thing, right? Like,
No, yeah.
gaslighting is working on this emotional level, so you don't necessarily dissect it or
Yeah.
deconstruct it, which is why it's gaslight, because it's too dim to do any actual intricate work,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I suspect, you know, well, I guess I won't suspect anything. You're the young person. Do you think this sort of like consumerism culture and this sort of like, because that's certainly the image that people have of young people. It's like, yeah, they're lazy, they just want iPhones and new sneakers.
Yeah.
And ultimately they're narcissistic. And it's, debunk that or agree with it. What do you think about
It's
your
hard
culture?
for generalizations like
Yeah.
that because I think that like we're so diverse and like there's so much different like things that we're bringing to the table. I think that there are a lot of people like that. Like I know people who just like to buy stuff and like to just kind of float through life, just being like, oh, what's the next thing I can get? How do I don't know, grow my social status, whatever. That's all they think about. There's always been people like that. But I think that the people in our generation who are like these revolutionary types or these people who I think have broader ideas about the world and how we could change it, I think there's a lot more of those than there used to be, and I think that they're a lot more educated, especially with the internet. Like I think that that's been a great resource for people who have left-wing ideas or ideas that are progressive that could, you know, help shape the future. And like by having the internet and having resources where we can like understand these things in a pretty simplistic form, it's easy to be able to understand why we shouldn't do certain things. And I think it affects a lot of people. Like if you even for like the mainstream culture, if you look at like the straw thing, like the metal straw thing, where they were banning plastic straws and everyone was buying metal straws and stuff like that. Not great because, you know, it's a capitalistic endeavor where you get people to buy more things to help them. But I think that kind of culture of just like, we got to do something is definitely there. But again, like the problem is that like a lot of people don't see that the solutions that are like the capitalistic solutions where don't buy this thing, but buy this thing instead are not right.
I
think that's the problem we're facing.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I think that like with the internet as well, it's really good for people who have progressive ideas and want to change the world and want to do good, but it's also really bad for people who might not feel like they belong or might feel like they're not being listened to or might feel like this new age and this new world is like working against them, and that's where people fall into the right-wing rabbit hole.
Interesting, yeah.
And you can have, like I was saying earlier,
is that something you see around? Is that like people your age? I mean, I know we're all in our little bubbles.
I don't know people personally, but
Yeah.
I do know that there are people definitely my age who are like that. If you see in the States, like people like, you know, school shootings and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah. There's
You can-
plenty of evidence
Yes.
of the divide, the way the culture divides us into these camps.
And it's particularly affecting young boys. Like that's like the hugest like population of my concern is like young men who are just like they don't feel like they have a place in the movement, in the revolution, I guess you could say, because a lot of the things that people are working against are positions where, you know, white men who were, you know, fit and like able to do things that they would be able to go in those positions of power, and we're fighting against those.
Right.
And so I think people feel like,
Because there's an emasculation?
yeah, sort of an emasculation, although I think that it's sort of like this thing that's been constructed by the right it's a manipulation, because if you're working class and if you have the same ideologies and you care about the planet, you care about people, you still have a place there. Because the people that we're really fighting aren't white men. It's not white men that people are fighting against. It's the billionaire class.
Right. Yeah,
and
yeah.
And I think that, like,
it's really important to
yeah,
keep the
it's
eye on the
important to keep
prize,
that.
on the target.
Yeah.
And that's easily distracted.
But I think that there's been a lot of recently, like I think it was really, really bad like a few years ago. Like I think that the right-wing culture and like even like extreme subsets like Nazism was like terrible. And I think that it's slowly starting to get better. It's still out there and it's still like a rapidly growing thing. But I think that there are, and there are people who are de-radicalizing people. Like that's their whole thing. On YouTube, that's huge. Like there's like almost a group of like people who are just de-radicalizing people
really?
by providing information, and that's all they do. They just provide information in a reasonable way, and they don't talk down to these people. And I think it helps like a lot
Interesting.
of people.
Maybe we can link to one of those. I've never heard of that. But
ContraPoints is one. Philosophy Tube, he does great videos on that. I think
Okay.
that all those people like they really like hit the nail on the head and help these people who feel lost and feel like they have. And a lot of the thing is like the left doesn't do a great job of helping people to understand things. I think for a lot of the time, at least in the mass media, but I think that on the internet, like there are certain subsets that really try and help people understand the philosophy and why we have to proceed this way.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll link to some of those things because those
Yeah.
are resources that I'm not aware of. So. What's the way forward for like what is it going to take for young people to kick ass and do what needs to be done? Do you see any like seeds planted out there? Do you see any like hooks in the culture that are have potential to bring the kind of momentum and focus that a real like student youth movement can kind of congeal around? Because I will say this, and I think you know this, almost all change in sort of society has come from young people. You know, like civil rights movements.
Yep.
And like in China with Tiananmen Square, the revolutions around the world are often populated by the young. And by God, this is it, right? This is the big show. Like, where the hell are they? Like, what do you?
I think that like I protest culture is like a whole thing, and I think that's also something that's like really helping fuel this. And I think that like I go to protests sometimes. I know people who go to protests. Like it's a huge thing, and I think when you go to protests, you can kind of see, like, I think people really are, and I like to harp on this idea because I think it's so true, is that people are taking inspiration from the hippie movement and from, like, the 60s and 70s when they were fighting the Vietnam War, because that's the largest, like, mass conglomeration
a lot of
of,
the
like,
images from that
exactly.
seem to have survived.
If you go to protests, you'll see posters that are just kind of almost mimicking that. Like, I remember going to one in March. It was the climate change protest in March, and someone had a sign that said, "You're going to die of old age, but I'm going to die of climate change." But the poster was designed in a way that it looked like it was from the 60s.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of stuff like that, and I think like counterculture from the 60s and 70s is coming back.
Yeah.
And like these sort of like anarchist sort of left-wing, new left-wing ideology is coming back, and it's something that people enjoy, and I think people are latching onto because it's like we're actually doing stuff, we're actually discussing things, we're discussing the real stuff. Like we're not like doing this kind of faux liberalism, like kind of touching on the topics but not going too in depth, just sort of scratching the surface. But like these left-wing movements are actually delving deep into it, and it's a profound sense of community, especially for people who are from working class places. It's just like if you look at the left-wing culture in youth culture, I think that you'll see like this sense of camaraderie and like community is really strong. So I think that that's something that's really
Oh, that's exciting, and that to me that's a big piece of optimism. I've always believed that revolution and that's a scary word. I do mean it, but protest. Let's just bring it back to protest. is fun. And it's
Yeah.
fun in fundamentally important ways.
Yeah.
People want community. And that's the driving force of not just youth culture, but certainly youth culture. Like community, friends,
Yeah.
passion, joy, you know, and then all of the sort of the frills that come with it. Like
Yeah.
you get to wear funky clothes,
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
get to dance to, you know, funky beats, and you get to, you know,
Yeah.
put stuff in your hair.
And I think it's like a huge, like it's a big, like safe space for people who are
A safe space.
marginalized, especially.
Yeah.
Like even if you're just like, we're just gonna wait for this.
beep beep beep. That's our life.
Even if you're like even if you're just working class, like that's a culture that you can fit into because we all
Totally.
like kind of have the same struggles. And if you're marginalized, like LGBT populations and like left-wing cultures like this
Yeah.
are like ginormous because like, you know, it makes sense because
Totally.
they actually want to fight for our rights, unlike, you know, some right-wing populations.
Right.
But I think that's a huge thing in like music as well. Like I think like a huge thing in the like left-wing like sort of revolutionary culture is like folk punk music, and that's sort of like that's I think the new thing for like our generation.
Interesting.
I think that's like a huge piece of music.
It's interesting. It's folk punk. I mean,
Yeah.
you just pulled 60s and 70s
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And
it's just
you were
kind
talking
of-
about that, how culture
Yeah.
has this sort of like,
Amalgamation.
yeah, right, this sort of like riffing on
Yeah.
the past and bringing it forward.
And you see like a grittiness in this like sort of DIY-ness where it's like if you look at the music genre, like it's like a lot of people just recording in their basements or something.
yeah.
So it's like this sort of grassroots movement of just
Which is important because you can't
Yeah.
get this stuff from the mass media. It's going to be
Yeah.
counterculture, right?
Yeah.
Like that's. Well, my good man. Yeah, let's feed that counterculture.
Yes,
And
I agree.
and let's not give up on optimism because there's no choice in that
Yeah.
regard. So thanks y'all for coming out to North America.
Bye-bye.
And I'll post some of those things below that you mentioned, and
Yeah.
maybe other resources that you can think of that you know that you can share with the balding and the
Yeah.
graying. All right, cheers.
Bye-bye.